Hi guys, I'm Kalia, and Nikita, Lainey, Catherine, and I are going to teach y'all about the muscular system. So, the purpose of the muscular system is movement. Muscular tissue is the only tissue that has the ability to contract. Therefore, it's the only tissue that allows movement. Related to movement is the muscular system's second function, posture and body position. If you didn't have muscles, the full posture and when you're standing up straight, you wouldn't be able to do that. Muscles control walking, talking, sitting, standing, eating, and basically everything that you do every day to move around and communicate. Muscles are pretty much like everything that you do, aside from just like sitting there rigid, would be for muscles. In addition, they serve to control necessary posture and blood circulation throughout the body. For example, the pyloric sphincter is an example of an internal muscle that is necessary for digestion. If the sphincter was not able to muscularly contract like it's supposed to, the digestion timeline would not be regulated properly. So, we have the main components of the muscular system. There are three main muscle groups: smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. And cardiac muscles are the cells located in the walls of the heart, and they're under involuntary control, which means like your heart beats on its own. You don't have to consciously think, oh, heart beat. That would be a lot of work. And smooth muscle fibers are located in the walls of hollow visceral organs. They're also under involuntary control. So that's something like, I don't know, all your internal muscles, like your digestive, your alimentary canal, all of that. And the final type of muscle is skeletal muscle. And skeletal muscle fibers occur in muscles which are attached to the skeleton. They're under voluntary control. So that would be like your limbs, your fingers, your neck, all of the muscles that you can move on your own. So I'm going to hand it over to Catherine, and she's going to tell you about the functions of the major parts.
Okay, so there's three major types of muscles, and that's the skeletal muscle, the cardiac muscle, and the smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle creates movement in the body. Cardiac muscle makes up the walls of the heart and creates the pulsing that keeps blood flowing around the body. It also creates the electrical impulses to produce contractions. Smooth muscle lines organs and systems to push things through in response to stimuli or electrical impulses. And an example of this is the digestive system, where it pushes food through the alimentary canal via peristalsis. There are also fibers and tissues in the muscles, and these are tendons, which connect skeletal muscle to bones, which are the ones that will move. So they're very strong, flexible, and resistant to tearing. Ligaments are fibrous material connecting two bones that are moved by the skeletal muscles, which provides stability for the bones being moved. There's muscle fiber, which is composed of myofibrils, which are thin filaments, and thick filaments, which interact to create muscle contraction. There are two different types of muscle fibers: tonic fibers and twitch spastic fibers. Tonic fibers are slow contracting fibers that create low force, which you can sustain for long periods of time, whereas twitch spastic fibers produce fast contractions, make up the muscles needed for fast reactions, speed, and other things like that. And they can produce a much greater amount of force than tonic fibers can. Within the muscle itself, there are different types of connective tissues. There's the endomysium, which is a delicate connective muscle tissue which surrounds the individual muscle fibers with small bundles. So they are right here. Then there are the epimysium, which are fibrous elastic tissue, which surrounds and wraps the entire muscle. So it shows it here. There's the perimysium, which is connective tissue, and it connects the bundles of muscle tissue created by the endomysium together. So it shows it right here. And then there's fascia, which is very thick connective tissue, and it covers the entire muscle over the epimysium. And it shows it. These are the different functions that a muscle can do. It can be a flexor, which means that it bends a limb, an extensor, which means that it extends or straightens a limb, an abductor, which means it moves a bone away from the midline, an adductor, moving a bone closer to the midline, a levator, which creates upward movement, a depressor, which creates downward movement, a supinator, which turns the palm upward or anteriorly, a pronator, which turns the palm downward, a sphincter, which changes the size of an opening, a tensor, which increases rigidity of that part of the body, and a rotator, which rotates a bone around a longitudinal axis. And here's Lainey, who will talk about the basics of muscle contraction.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about kind of the basics of muscle contraction and how the muscular system works. So basically, first of all, the brain sends a signal telling the muscle to contract, and the amount of force that the muscle exerts depends on how much the muscle contracts. And muscles are just bundles of many cells called fibers, which we talked about earlier, and fibers just compress by sliding past each other like a sliding glass door. So to go into a little more detail about exactly how this happens, let's go through the process more specifically. And the process that I'm about to go over applies to skeletal muscle, but we'll go over the differences between the different types of muscle in a minute. So thick and thin filaments within the muscle do all of the work of contraction. The thick filaments are made of myosin protein, while actin protein makes up the thin filaments. During contraction, the thick and thin filaments form a chemical bond called a cross bridge, which is extended by ADP and inorganic phosphate. Once this cross bridge is formed, the thick filaments pull the thin filaments past them, which is called a power stroke, and this is the contraction part. Next, a molecule of ATP binds to the myosin, causing it to release the actin molecule. And then once the actin is released, the ATP splits into ADP and P, and then the energy resets the myosin so that the motion can be repeated, so that it can contract again and repeat the whole process. And these two charts just kind of give you a visual of how this happens. You can see kind of how it happens, this cycle with the thick and thin filaments, and then the ADP, and then the ATP, and it kind of resetting and starting over again. And so just to go over how kind of each separate type of muscle will go through the process of contraction and movement a little bit differently, because the specifics that I gave you were for skeletal muscle. And with skeletal muscle, like we've talked about, the muscle contractions allow for skeletal movement, and the peripheral portion of the nervous system controls the muscles. The movement is voluntary, and the muscles act independently of neighboring muscles. But with the smooth muscle, the muscles contract involuntarily. So that whole thing is involuntary and controlled by the autonomic nervous system. And the contraction happens slowly and rhythmically. With cardiac muscle, it's also controlled involuntarily by the nervous system, but it's a more strong rhythmical contraction than the smoother skeletal muscle. Okay, so now here's Nikita, who's going to tell you about medical conditions and homeostasis.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about causes of medical problems. Some common causes include injury or overuse, a genetic disorder, certain types of cancers, inflammation, diseases, infections, or certain medicines. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some common medical problems. So the ones in blue are the ones that are genetic. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of each one. Muscular dystrophy is when muscles weaken slowly due to a lack of dystrophin, and dystrophin holds the skeletal muscle cells together. Instead of that, the muscle tissues are replaced by fat, and here is a picture of this. Okay, so the next one is myopathy, and it is a disease that weakens the skeletal muscles, and this primarily starts at a young age, and this can be sometimes due to drug effects, chemical poisoning, or an immune disorder. And here's a picture describing myopathy. Okay, so we have a lot of medical diseases listed here. You guys can just look up the rest in class, but we're going to talk about cramps and spasms because I know a lot of people get those. So cramps and spasms are just muscle contractions due to fatigue, and this is involuntary, and this can be treated with stretching and hydration. Okay, So homeostasis. Homeostasis is basically just when organs and systems of the body work with other organs and systems to create a balance that affects the whole body. Some common examples of homeostasis include heat generation, food digestion, breathing, and blood circulations. In the muscular system, there are 3 basic types of homeostasis that include the smooth muscle, skeletal muscles, and cardiac muscles, and the nervous system. Smooth muscles, as mentioned earlier, are involuntary muscles, and they maintain homeostasis because the internal organs stay in an equilibrium with the body, and this maintains blood pressure. Skeletal muscles receive movements from neurons in the nervous system. The signals tell the muscles what type of movements are necessary. We are able to move because skeletal muscles attach to our bones. Next, we have cardiac muscles, which the cardiac muscle heart controls the heart rate, blood, and oxygen delivery to the rest of the body. Okay, finally, we have the nervous system, which includes the brain, neurons, and spinal cord. The nervous system controls heartbeats. The medulla sends and receives messages chemically and hormonally through the nerves that are transmitted to muscles and organs. Here are some pictures of the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and the skeletal muscle. Some examples of homeostasis within the body are that you shiver when you're cold, and this is because your muscles generate heat to warm up your body. Every shiver is basically a muscle contraction that works with the skeletal muscles. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have you sweat when you're hot, and that's basically because your sweat cools down the body.
Now, here are all of our sources, and thank you guys so much.